Hello, it's great to be able to join this conference virtually. We have just all been together as a global community in a tremendous disruption of our daily lives and the way that we work with this COVID-19 crisis, that we've seen over 400,000 people die because of this crisis, and half of the world in lockdown for weeks and months at a time, which has completely cut us off from our normal ways of working. And this has led to a tremendous loss of jobs, and even entire businesses either have already or will perish because of this plague. And as we gather here together in early June of 2020, that we're beginning to see signs of hope, that elements of this crisis are beginning to abate, and we're moving past to a post-lockdown world. And one of the major reasons that we've been able to come through this has been digital. Digital technologies have enabled us to stay connected to our loved ones, to stay connected to goods and services, and basically make it through this crisis and enable the lockdown to save many lives, probably in the millions of lives. So let's talk about what the impact of COVID-19 crisis is going to be on digital technologies, and digital technologies to some extent, what their impact has been on the crisis. So to kick off this discussion, I'd like to start out by telling a little bit about the company I work for, not as a sales pitch, but to set the context for this discussion and where we're coming from. So GlobalLogic, my company, has about 16,000 people, mostly software engineers, who develop products for other companies in a variety of industries. And these industries range across the spectrum, from healthcare to retail to financial to communications to transportation to education. Pretty much every element of life that's touched by software, we have some finger in. Now, these companies that are on the screen, we don't develop all their products, not by a long shot. We'd love to, but we don't. However, we have almost certainly been responsible for development of some of their products that touch your life as an individual. So this gives us a very interesting perspective, I think, on what's happening with the crisis and on how the various vertical segments, retail, finance, education, and so on, are adapting and affected by this. So first, let's talk about digital. What do we mean by digital? So in the context of this talk, I mean, lots of people have different definitions for what's digital and what's not. But in the context of this talk, let's talk about digital meaning not physical. And I hate to put it negatively, but the more that physical interactions are removed from the process, the more digital that process is. For example, calling an Uber, when we used to do that before the crisis. There's no humans in the loop between, there is still physical transportation provided, but there's no humans in the loop between the passenger and the driver. That's a very heavily digital process. Others, like package delivery and logistics, also require physical interaction to deliver whatever that package is and to move that package through the various logistical chain, but it's enabled by digital technology. So digital technologies include AI, which replaces many previously human roles. It includes the communications channels, the means of interaction, and everything in between. So it's digital technology has been developing over the last 30 years with the widespread introduction of the World Wide Web back in the 1990s. But digital really started to affect the population deeply around 2007 with when the iPhone shipped and Amazon public cloud first became available the year before. So that's 13 years ago, roughly. And if we assume that children start using digital technology at maybe 2 or 3 years old, which is certainly strongly the case these days, we can say that anybody who is under 16 years of age right now, or younger than 16 years old, is a digital native. They were born into a digital world. They have never had an experience of any other type of world than a digital one. Now, people slightly older than that, in their 20s or in their 30s, have had a predominantly digital experience. It's been very formative through their teenage years, and their entire life as an adult has been a digital one. But as an early childhood, they can still remember and tell stories to their own children about how things were different when they were kids. People who are still older than that, the Gen X and above people in their 40s and 50s, have many of them have become very strong digital adopters. It's not necessarily, age is not necessarily a prohibition. However, what we see is that the predominant digital adoption is predominant among younger people, and it tapers off as people get older. So there's a digital divide, a digital generation gap that will inform some of the things that happen here. Similarly, on companies that have technology companies in particular, or technology-focused companies that have been founded since the 1990s, were often born digital. So these are the Amazons and the Googles and the LinkedIns and the Ubers and so on, who Airbnb, who were conceived as digital engagement platforms. And these are the digital natives, the people who were born digital. Other companies, even quite old ones that are over a century old, have very active engagement with digital, very active adoption of digital. And these can be digitally enabled companies as well, right? But what happens is that, again, there's a generational phenomenon where the younger companies tend to be more digitally focused, the ones that were founded more recently, and the ones that were founded uh, long ago often struggle to make digital part of their DNA. That's where the digital transformation process comes in. It affects both people becoming digitally transformed and affects companies who are becoming more digitally transformed with more or less success. So, what has happened with the COVID-19 crisis? Well, this is the background going into it. We have these digital natives, and we have the people who are collectively, let's call them digital citizens. We have the people who are digital citizens, and we have the people who are not. We have the people who are from an analog world, or at least a non-digital one. What has happened? Well, during the COVID-19 crisis and the reaction to it, the shutdowns and the shelter in place and the stay-at-home orders, all physical contact with the world, or much physical contact with the world, was suddenly cut off. And their physical channels, in other words, many of them, failed to work. Some stayed active, for example, groceries and pharmacies. You could still collect things in person. But by and large, all the means that we used to engage with our work and with the world by physical channels no longer were valid. Now, this had varying impacts on different types of companies. The ones that were born digital, for example, my own company, GlobalLogic, was founded in 2000 as a digital company. We transitioned very easily to a non-physical world because we had already enabled all of our engineers with laptops, most of our engineers worldwide with laptops. And within a week, literally 93% of our people were productively working from home. Other people we work on hardware as well. So we developed some hardware involved with automobiles and medical devices and so on. It took a little extra time to transition that physical equipment into people's homes, but we did it with our customers' support. And so currently at this point, 98% of GlobalLogic employees of our 16,000 employees worldwide are productively working from home. And when I say productively, I mean that quite literally, that we all experienced, and I know that I did, and you probably did too, that the first couple of weeks were quite scary. That there was, a sense of dread, a sense of uncertainty, what's going to happen. But that has passed for many of us. And among those groups where we have metrics in place to measure people's productivity, for example, velocity metrics in agile projects, we can say for sure that productivity has recovered to pre-COVID levels, and in some cases has even begun to increase among employees at home. And this is a trend that other companies are seeing as well, is that their digital workforce, their already digital workforce, is in some cases being as productive or more productive working in a distributed work from home situation as it was in the office. We also see other older businesses, for example, the New York Stock Exchange, which was founded in the early 1800s, so close to 200 years old at this point. So it's they were able to work from home. That their iconic trading floor was emptied of all people for 2 months, and I didn't even notice. I think many people didn't even notice. We noticed the stock market was still going because we were getting reports on that every day, but there were no traders on the trading floor, and they didn't lose a beat in terms of moving to a digital world. Other companies were more heavily affected, and again, this is partly generational, the companies that could have digitized but didn't. Uh, and it's partly situational, that if you're a hair salon, there's no way you can avoid physical engagement with a real person. You're not going to be able to do hair cutting remotely, no matter how digital you are and what sort of engagement channels that you have. Now, those people who relied on a physical presence of a human being to do their work were able to stay engaged with their customers the more digital they were and cultivate that kind of loyalty. Cruise lines, you see many of those restaurants, hotels, they were able to keep you engaged, keep you in the loop the more digitally oriented they were until they can reopen, and so that they could capture the pent-up demand that could occur. So they saw benefits from being digital, but no amount of digital could have overcome some of the situations that we just faced. But those are hopefully temporary. And the benefits of digital, even to those entities, are becoming very clear. Other entities actually even profited, thrived from, I'm not saying that they exploited the crisis at all. What I'm saying is that in a purely digital environment where the entire world was forced to engage strictly through digital channels, uh, companies like telcos, telephone companies, media and entertainment companies, those that do interactive gaming, electronic gaming, thrived because people were stuck at home, and how do they engage with the world? Unified communication, like we're using right now to have this conference, has thrived, and the companies that were able to scale to meet the demand have done exceedingly well through this crisis. Again, I'm not saying anybody profiteered. I'm not aware of anybody profiteering, but circumstances favored the prepared, the digitally prepared in this case. So, how would I sum that up? I would say that COVID-19 is a virus that we already know among the demographics. It selectively targets older people, at least in terms of the impact of its symptoms. But it also selectively targets non-digital businesses. That businesses that either can't become digital or have not become digital because they chose not to, um, are suffering the most or suffered the most. And even businesses that became digital but with legacy technology have seen many of their systems collapse under the increased load of having all methods of engagement become digital. We saw that with some of the unified communication companies, video conferencing, that weren't able to withstand the load, and the quality of service degraded significantly. So, what is the learning from this, and what is going to be the ongoing effect? Well, I personally believe that we're going to see a lot of the short-term effects of the COVID crisis uh, go away over the next year anyway. There may be recurrences, there may be additional outbreaks, but some of the needs for social distancing and some of those, the other more dramatic measures, are not going to persist. We're not going to be stuck in our houses forever. But I think what is going to persist is the learning that we have from this crisis, that over 1 billion people have had a forced education. That's the number of people who were stuck at home and had internet access. Well over 1 billion people, 1.5 billion people, digital was their only means of communication to the world, right? And people have learned what digital can do and what it cannot do. So what's the net effect? What's the long-term effect from this? Well, we talked about that generation gap between the older and the younger people, with younger people having grown up with digital technologies and being more tuned into what they can bring to the table. And older people, it's hit or miss. Some older people are very tuned in, while others are not. And within businesses, let's face it, the older generation tends to dominate. They tend to be the executives, the management, that the younger people have to convince that a new trend is valid. So what's happened from the crisis? The older people get it. The older people now get the benefit. They've had a forced education in what digital technology can do in terms of delivering, in terms of their work, in terms of their ability to deliver their goods and services, and also as consumers in terms of their ability to consume uh, goods and services. Digital technology has been essential for a period of months, and I think that that 2-3 month period of lockdown has changed the thinking of the key deciders within businesses, so that the way will be much smoother for those who've championed digital transformation post COVID than it was before. So let's take a look at some specific industries and see what the impact of the crisis has been on them. One area where GlobalLogic uh, plays a significant role is in transportation. And what we're seeing is it's actually pretty interesting to me that it's not a direct technology effect. There were some slowdowns in factory, stoppages and so on that have now resumed. However, uh, the net effect really is that there's a glut now of unsold cars because nobody bought a car, or few people bought a car during the lockdown. But on the other hand, people have lost jobs or are afraid of losing their jobs, and they're more timid about spending money. So what we're seeing emerge is consideration of novel models of paying for transportation, such as pay for usage, and even the sale of your car to a financial entity and lease it back, paying by the mile, paying for usage. So that enables a glut of inventory to meet up with people who have limited means at this point, or limited willingness to spend large amounts of money at this point. So how is that enabled? That's digitally enabled. You need digital in order to determine those miles and to calculate the payments, and that's a purely digital form of interaction. Also, cars have become increasingly important, especially in the United States, but I believe in other countries as well, as a means of physical isolation. So graduation parties and many other events are now mobile in cars where they were in person before. We're also seeing one of the bright spots in the transportation industry, which has been decimated by this event, has been in logistics of fleets of trucks, because there's been a huge upsurge in delivery to the home, last mile delivery, it's called. That all has to be the logistics behind those and the tracking of those, and be able to report where your package is all digitally enabled. And I think the barriers to taking those systems forward have now gone away for good. Also, kind of incidentally, I thought it was interesting that private aviation is seeing an uptick for the same reason cars are seeing an uptick, that at least the people who can afford it would rather be on their own jet than share one with the rest of us. Um, Media and communications, from a financial standpoint, has benefited from the crisis. Like I say, it's not a question of profiteering; it's a question of um, the demand for their services becoming extremely high, because, again, the only way to do digital is over some communication medium. So the communications companies, the unified communications, the teleconferencing, and event management software, and so on, have seen a huge uptick. And then the supporting infrastructure around those for broadband communication and self-healing networks and capacity. Smart cities is also an important one, though I don't think that's going to necessarily be a long-term trend for safety and security, for enforcing social distancing regulations, and even identifying people who have elevated temperatures or otherwise some sort of health risk. I personally think that's going to be a short-term trend, but I think a long-term trend is the need for communication services is now very apparent to everybody who had any doubts about that. Healthcare has surprisingly been rather a mixed bag financially during the crisis, because it's surprising because there's been a health crisis. Everything related directly to COVID-19 response has seen a huge surge uh, in need and in investment. But everything else has been put on hold. Every other event has been deferred. Medical, routine physicals, getting your teeth cleaned, all those sorts of things have been deferred. Not indefinitely, though. Those are necessities, and they will come back, certainly. And there'll be a huge glut that needs to be worked out of need that needs to work its way through the supply chain. However, in the United States, for example, one of the areas that has been exposed as a weakness is supply chain. That we had a great difficulty in ramping up our testing and our protective equipment and so on because of the fragmented nature of the market in the United States. Similar thing is true within Europe as an entity, I believe, because of the fragmentation there by country. But within a given country, there's usually a single provider in Europe. But in the United States, it's kind of a microcosm of all those different systems, and we've seen some of those flaws. A few of the surprises to me in the healthcare field were pet services that we at GlobalLogic have seen a tremendous uptick in demand for pet care software that supports pet care services, for example, veterinary and pet health and pet telehealth. So, because people, as they shelter in place at home, are spending more time with their pets, they're more aware of their pets' needs, and they're more aware of the centrality of the pets to their lives, so that their healthcare is become increasing. Their awareness of the need for healthcare has become more apparent. Another trend that I think is here to stay, simply because it works better for both the patient and the doctor, has been telemedicine. My wife, for example, is a clinical psychologist. She sees patients in her office for therapy. She's had to do teletherapy using over FaceTime or Zoom or some other connection mechanism while she was sheltered in place. Some of her patients like it a great deal and want to continue with that. And my wife likes the location independence that it gives her. So she's going to continue at least one day a week with doing teletherapy. Other things are possible in teletherapy that have not really been fully exploited. And teletherapy, of course, is what we're doing right now in terms of communication. Using computer vision algorithms, you can detect facial asymmetries that may be indicators of stroke. And you can also detect voice anomalies that may be indicators of autism or other conditions that can be diagnosed remotely instead of waiting a long time to get into the hospital. So this remote working is something that works for a lot of people and actually is better in many cases. In education, at least 400,000 children of school age were stuck at home with internet access during the lockdown crisis. And it's been a very kind of mixed sort of experience, that the social aspects of school are extremely important to children and to the education experience. So being around other children is a primary means not only of learning, but of engagement with the entire school experience. So taking that out of the equation has been very difficult for many children. However, the ability to deliver more personalized education, either using AIML or using direct tutoring techniques over tele education, has actually enabled some students to thrive. And we believe that distributed education, personalized education, will be a benefit that's been perceived as a result of the crisis and will continue post-lockdown, even when it's no longer a necessity. The retail has been the sector that has been hardest hit, especially brick and mortar retail. But surprisingly, to me at least, online retail hasn't gone up very much either. People have been spending. There's more people online shopping online. but they're spending less money. So there has not been a big uptick in retail sales online, rather surprisingly to me, except for Amazon, which has seen an uptick in per person spending, and specialty retail, for example, gym equipment, gym clothes, things like that, that are very from retailers who are very specialized. We think that trend for specialization, which is enabled by digital, had been enabled by digital for a long time among our client base, and many other retailers. We think that trend for personalization that can be supported by digital will continue as a means of hedging companies' bets and driving more from digital channels, so there's less dependence on brick and mortar. We think the awareness is there now to drive a change in thinking among the way retailers do business. Um, Finally, remote work in general. That the technology that enables people to work from home has existed for at least 30 years. And I know that firsthand because 30 years ago, when I was a single parent with young children, um, I was able to work from home. It required a dedicated ISDN connection and some fancy equipment back then, but it was certainly possible. And it's been more and more possible since then. And what's happened, though, is that few people take advantage of it. Estimates are only that set between 7% and 15, that's 15% of the population pre-COVID worked from home. So it's what I take away from that is working in an office is much more of a social thing, the casual contact with the boss, the water cooler discussions, than it is a technology thing. However, many more people have been exposed to working at home now, with 3 billion of us sheltering in place, more than 3 billion sheltering in place, and more importantly, with the bosses also having to shelter in place and realizing what they can now do digitally. So that awareness, I think, will increase the number of people who work remotely, work distributed, and have flexible work situations. I think it may as much as double it. I think it could be between 15 to 30% of the workforce working online. However, it's not going to be 100%, and I think it's going to be a rare business that shutters its doors to people coming into the office, because that social connection uh, is still very important. We also see that in our own work. My role at GlobalLogic, I primarily work with strategic customers in their digital transformations and designing their next generation systems. And that work has actually continued full speed. I've been as busy or busier than I've ever been during the lockdown than I am in person. The difference is I'm not traveling, obviously, where I'd be on the road basically all the time. And we're doing our information gathering interviews, our informational interviews with stakeholders via video conference. And what we're finding is that it's much more convenient for them and for us, that we have less logistical problem. We can actually work around the client's very busy schedules much more easily using video conferencing. And we're certainly going to keep that as a tool. However, what you don't get is the personal contact. And you have to plan your interactions much more, plan what you're going to say, plan what you're going to do. And those casual learnings and the relationships, it's not quite the same. Very interestingly, when people meet in person, their heartbeats tend to synchronize, their gestures tend to synchronize. People are exchanging chemical signals, they're exchanging lots of facial expression, body language signals. You can't see most of my body here. Whereas if we were in person, you'd be getting all kinds of information from me that I'm not even conscious of presenting. So I don't think the need for face-to-face contact will ever go away, but it will. But the awareness of the value of other ways of engaging will go up. So, just in summary, what I'd like to leave you with is the idea that the COVID crisis, tragic though it has been, has exposed many of the influencers in the world to new ways of engaging with the world through digital channels. I think that for those people who have not fully adopted digital or who were resistant to digital before, they've had their eyes open because they had no other choice. There's no way to, the way that you form a new habit is to repeat it multiple times. Everybody, multiple times a day, has had to interact through digital channels, including the executives in the business who didn't see the value before. So I think what's going to happen is that if you are a champion of digital transformation, of digital change, of new digital ways of engagement, you're going to come back to work or continue in your work right now and see that your road has been paved for you and obstacles that have been in your way before are have begun to dissipate. And thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. That was Jim Walsh with his keynote speech. Jim.
I do hear you, Yado. Great to see you. Can you hear me?
We used to do. I've heard a lot of things that were really close to me because I run a stand-up comedy show here in Slovakia, and we missed around 40 shows, and we were thinking like, what are we gonna do? And I was able to install Zoom with 16 of my comedians with like very different computer knowledge, and we were able to run around 50 live streams. We were running live streams each night, an hour, inviting guests, playing videos, and like everybody was really high skilling themselves, because there was like some of them were using the computer like, okay, we'll send email and close it, and I want them like, go buy a camera, they're out of cameras, okay, go buy headphones, they're not selling headphones, nobody has headphones, and finally we made it running. So this was really inspiring for me, and with the 99% within 2 weeks from your company, that is really cool. So are all your people, or most of the people in GlobalLogic like IT skilled?
Oh yeah. The vast majority are software developers, and so they're writing code, and you can write code anywhere, you know. So we also write code for automobiles and large medical equipment and so on. So that's a little hard to bring home with you. That's why it took an extra week. So we were able to bring some of that stuff home. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and one more question. I'm really concerned with security. Did you have any big security problems? Because you spoke about healthcare, you spoke about working from home. Sometimes people have they use their own computers, and it's really hard to provide the security needs with the VPNs, with the Zoom call bombing, remote desktops. Did you go through these kind of trouble at GlobalLogic?
Well, we already had a continuity of business plan that gave everybody a modern laptop and VPN connections and so on. So we were already set up for people to be able to work from home. So it just, we weren't expecting a pandemic, but our preparation for other types of disasters really prepared us for this. Thank God. I mean, I think we got lucky, and we did some things right.
Oh, that is perfect. So that's what we didn't have. Let's take a look at the questions people sent us. What do you think regarding pay-per usage model of financing in IT area? Let's call it open lease or so.
Of equipment? I think that's probably, yeah. I think that's probably gonna happen. I think we work with a lot of network equipment providers, and I know that some of them are thinking about it. Certainly they have to compete with the cloud, right, which is all pay for usage. So I think physical equipment has got to have some of the same business models as the cloud does. So yes, I think it will happen. Not directly because of COVID, but just because of general digital trends.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Jim, next question. What do you think was our biggest achievement and the biggest failure during the crisis?
Well, I would say that the biggest achievement is that we could do shelter in place at all without society collapsing. And I would say that the only reason we could do it successfully, and many of us who were able to stay employed, many of us were able to stay engaged with our families, many of us were Many of us lost a lot. But the reason that everybody didn't lose everything is because of digital technology and the ability that gave us to work remotely, to connect remotely, to consume remotely, and to manage all the complex logistics of the crisis. So I would say that, in previous pandemics, like in the flu outbreak of, I believe it was 1918 and so on,
Hmm.
millions of people lost their lives. And they lost their lives, I think, because they couldn't avoid mixing. They couldn't avoid seeing each other in person. There's no way to avoid face-to-face contact. So the only way it's even possible is because of digital technology. So I would say that was our greatest achievement. That 400,000 lives is a tragedy, but it could have been millions. And I'd say our biggest failure is, well, again, I'm thinking through a digital lens, right? Is
Yes.
that the crisis exposed these legacy systems, the lack of modernization. The systems collapsed under load. Unified communication systems in the United States. The reason so many people moved to Zoom is because it was the only one that wasn't crashing all the time
Hmm.
during the first week or two of the crisis. Now the others have caught up, right? But it exposed many of the legacy technologies and shortcuts and the fractures within digital modernization initiatives. So I think now that those have been exposed and now people see how valuable they can be, they're going to be remediated. But that everything was laid bare to the world that's non-digital, and I think it's in the long run going to be a good thing, though it's going to be a very painful thing in the short run.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, we're also speaking about telelearning or
Yeah.
online schools. How do you perceive the change in learning experience during COVID pandemic for students? Shall the school system apply these new models, and if so, in which ways?
Yes, I think so. I think this trend was already starting to happen in education, that a lot of the communication of knowledge is better done online and at your own pace. Even this is pre-crisis or post-crisis, that people learn better often. It depends. People have different learning modalities, and some people are kinesthetic and they need to move things around, and but others prosper when they can move at their own pace online with a graphically rich environment. Uh,
Hmm.
and it's a good way to communicate knowledge. It's not a good way to uh, to socialize information
Hmm.
and to interact, right? Or it's not as good as direct interaction. So I think what's going to happen is a lot of learning at home, but then going to the classroom to do workshops, to interact with the teacher, to have experiential learning. So I think we're going to have more of a mixed model moving forward, where it combines the two modalities.
I actually spoke to my friend. She's in Chicago now, and she attends the
Yeah,
improv group Second City workshops over the
yeah.
internet. I'm like, what? Can you do that? And she's like, yeah. There's like 6 people. It's 6 p.m. in Chicago. There are people from Florida, and they're learning improvisation over I don't know, Zoom or whatever, WebEx.
That's been the surprising thing for me too, is how well some of these things work. I think to a lot of us too. For example, my wife and I go to church, and our church shifted online within the first week. It's Silicon Valley Church, right? And every week it's got more capability. So now it's got live chat. It's like this conference now. And
Oh.
a lot of we'll definitely go back to a physical environment when it's available. But it's surprising, musical groups, concerts, how well they work in an online mode. I never would have even imagined. But so I think it's a learning experience, even for those of us who've been around digital technologies for quite a while.
Okay, thank you. Uh, do you expect people to learn to predict and prepare for pandemics like COVID-19?
No, no. I think we'll go back to our complacency. I don't think the learnings from this crisis directly are going to have a long term impact. So I don't think that we'll, for example, learn to do better social distancing. I think for the next year we'll do social distancing. We'll have different kind of ad hoc methods of doing that, or maybe even detecting it, whether somebody's standing too close and ringing a buzzer or something like that, right? Or tracking people who have been tested positive. I think those are likely as short-term things, but there's tremendous momentum to the human nature, that I'm kind of a student of history, and I'm always amazed that jokes from, Roman times and Greek times, classical times, many of them are still funny, and it's like
Hmm.
that really shows me people don't change. People, like you do stand up, right?
Hmm.
Some of the Roman stand ups would still crack them up today, I think, and, if humans stay the same and we're going to go back to the way that we were, but I think what's, in terms of interacting socially largely, but I think what we've all learned is that digital can do things that we never thought, like the improvs,
Hmm.
right, or singing groups or something like that, very well. And who would have thought it? My wife, teletherapy, she
Hmm.
never would have thought of remotely treating a patient, right?
Hmm.
And but it works really well, and it works even better for some people who can't,
Hmm.
get around that easily. So I think some of those things will continue on a lasting basis, but we won't be consciously thinking of the next lockdown until it hits us. There might be spikes, and we might have to go back into this mode, repeatedly, locally or something. But I don't think it's going to change culture, so that we
Well,
become a lockdown culture. Yeah.
I've seen a TEDx video of Bill Gates explaining that there is going to be another pandemics, and that
Oh,
the
sure.
hospitals and the doctors should communicate more rapidly and more easily. And maybe this is where the digitalization, if it goes at every place in Africa, in India, in China, the poorest villages, if you can get a set phone there and data, then maybe that's going to help to
Yes,
stop it faster.
I agree, but I think that'll be a benefit, not a cause, right? Because I
Hmm.
think what's happened is that the gaps in our system have been exposed, and now the people who have been championed saying, "Hey, this is the problem that we can't do." Supply chain across different providers, or we can't do this. We can't provide sat phone coverage to people have been saying that for years, right? Now the awareness is there that, yeah, they're right. There is a problem, right? But it won't be in the context of let's get ready for the next pandemic, right? It's just going to
Hmm.
be like we we've exposed a problem with our systems. Let's fix it, right? I mean, that's the way people think. It's
Yeah.
like I live in San Francisco. We know for sure, San Francisco Bay Area, and we know for sure there's going to be another earthquake, right? Do people worry about it? No. Do people prepare for it? Not very much. So it's like it's here, or people living on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, right? It's like
Mhm.
we just don't think that way as a species. We don't, we're not thinking about the next disaster. But
Yeah,
what we
live.
will do is we'll learn from the current one what didn't work, and then we'll fix it. Just because we want to fix it, we know it's broken.
Yeah, that's how we go. Live fast, die young. Uh,
Yeah,
lot of people are liking a
exactly.
question. How would you compare our home office productivity and working from a real office? Did it grow? Because I have many friends who tell me they managed to do more without the colleagues bothering them, without the need for small talk and everything. So how did it go at your company?
Well, it's interesting. Like my own experience was, I felt less productive. I
Hmm.
Because the things, the nature of the interruptions of my day changed. Like I was having lunch with my wife, and she'd ask me to take out the trash or whatever, and it's like it felt like I was getting a lot less done, and we're all stressed out and everything. But I was actually doing some technical work that I could measure my productivity, and I
Hmm.
realized that even though I felt like I was getting less done, I was actually getting the same amount done that I got done when I was able to go to the
Wow.
office, right? And also many of our projects were able to track productivity because we have agile velocity productivity metrics and other metrics around that. And they had the same experiences that they had emotionally felt like they were dragging for the first 2 to 4 weeks, but their
Hmm.
productivity actually didn't dip much at all, and it's
Hmm.
actually recovered. And in the cases when it did dip, and it's on the increase. So I can't make a flat statement that, I mean, some people are going to be more productive at home than at work. I've always done some degree of my work at home because I get more done there. I have fewer interruptions in the office, right? When I have to think, thinking
Hmm.
work, I tend to do that at home. But, uh, but it's, Whether we can make a blanket statement that everyone is productive, more productive from home, I don't think that's true. But I think people are going to find that in certain situations they are productive, more productive, and employers are going to be more flexible about letting them do that because they know they can be productive.
Hmm.
So I think more people, probably double the people now, are going to start working from home than
Yeah, I think
currently
that's
work
that,
from home, at
and
least
that's.
some of
I
the
think
time. Yeah,
that's a good way. Jim,
yeah,
thank you. Our time's
been
up,
my
but
pleasure.
we'll meet you again in a couple of minutes, precisely at 4:30, where people can join you for a live chat, and I think that a lot of people will. So thank you. And they told me it's like 7 a.m. At San Francisco.
Yes, that's right. It's just getting up to 7 a.m. So
Wow.
it's been an early day for me. But yeah, we
So.
can't change. One thing we can't fix digitally is the time zones, right? So you just have to deal with those.
Yeah. But thank you very much for you waking up that
Been my
early,
pleasure.
for being with us, and hope you have a successful day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You too.